Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the poem of the day for today, Monday, October the 6th, 2025. Thank you again for joining us, or thank you for joining us for the first time. Now that we're in October and further into October, I'm going to spend some time reading a favorite of the spooky season, so much so that perhaps it's cliched. We're going to read from the poems of Edgar Allan Poe. And today we're not going to read The Raven, though that's his most famous one. We will at some point read The Raven. But there were a number of other poems that Poe wrote, and some of them get some attention. Annabelle Lee is one that gets attention. A lot of them don't. And part of it is, I think, because Poe is sometimes regarded as not that good of a poet, actually. I'm not going to take that stance or a stance on that one way or another, because in these videos I don't really aim to critique so much as just to reflect, analyze, and share. But I think that gives us some context for why we might know his prose more than his poetry, except for The Raven. That his prose, particularly with the sophistication of the diction and the use of the first person voice, the predating of psychology, especially in something like The Telltale Heart, where you can get a sense of what he writes about later in a essay, The Imp of the Perverse, that desire that we have to stare into the abyss and jump, even though we know that it might lead to a certain annihilation of the self or the ego, that we have this overwhelming temptation to do so. He also kind of invented the detective story, at least in the American tradition, both with Murders at the Rue Morgue, but also with, oh my goodness, it's the title's escaping me now. The Purloined Letter. There we go, The Purloined Letter. And many people, at least if you're educated in the United States, have read a lot of his short stories. I mentioned The Telltale Heart, The Black Cat, Murders at the Rue Morgue, The Cask of Amontillado, The Mask of the Red Death, The Fall of the House of Usher is actually my favorite one out of those. And there's many, many more. Today we are going to read his poem Dreams, which is one of the least spooky of his poems. And it's more, I think, focused on the importance of the imagination within the Romantic tradition. And so this is from 1827, and it's Dreams by Edgar Allan Poe. Oh, that my young life were a lasting dream, my spirit not awakening till the beam of an eternity should bring the morrow. Yes, though that long dream were of hopeless sorrow, 'twere better than the dull reality of waking life to him whose heart shall be, and hath been ever, on the chilly earth, a chaos of deep passion from his birth. But should it be, that dream eternally continuing, as dreams have been to me in my young boyhood, should it thus be given, 'twere folly still to hope for higher heaven, for I have reveled when the sun was bright in the summer sky, in dreamy fields of light, and left unheedingly at my very heart, and climes of mine imagining, apart from mine own home, with beings that have been of mine own thought. What more could I have seen? 'Twas once, and only once, and the wild hour from my remembrance shall not pass. Some power or spell had bound me. 'Twas the chilly wind came over me in the night, and left behind its image on my spirit, or the moon shone on my slumbers in her lofty noon, too coldly, or the stars. However it was, that dream was the night wind. Let it pass. I have been happy, though but in a dream. I have been happy, and I love the theme. Dreams, and their vivid coloring of life, as in that fleeting, shadowy, misty strife of semblance with reality, which brings to the delirious eye more lovely things of paradise and love, and all our own, than young Hope in his sunniest hour hath known. Okay. It's a depressing poem. The speaker in this poem is unstable. And we can see that stylistically through a lot of the exclamations, the lines that begin with "oh" and "yes," the M dashes that are breaking up his thoughts, particularly later, creating a caesura in some of the lines. I have been happy, though in a dream, there's a balance in there of kind of responding to oneself to say I was happy, but it was this, I was happy and I loved it. So there's a kind of splinter or fracturing in his mind that's captured within the verse. I think the rhyming couplets within it also indicate a certain holding in or a certain conservation, a lack of risk taking, or a conforming to a strict and steady emotion, because the state of the speaker is one that is so unsettled at this point. There's also allusions in here and calling out apostrophes to things like hope, paradise, love, heaven, eternity. And there's an inconsistency as well to the structure. We have 4 stanzas. 3 of them have 8 lines. The second one has 10, I think. So it kind of quickly expands and breaks out of the structure that's established within the first stanza. We also just quite simply have a lot of exclamation points. Some rhetorical questions, not many. I count 1, but several exclamations, which indicate an intensity of passion on the part of the speaker. So what I hear in this is a person who is wishing that they could trade their life for a dream. And it's because when they're within the dreams, they feel an eternity and they feel a respite from tomorrow and from the hopeless sorrow that they're in. There was one of those lines. So it's a melancholic and a depressed person, somebody who is anxious about what tomorrow brings, but the timelessness of the liminal space within the dream is something that frees them from that. You don't really have a sense of time passing within your dream. The world for them is described as chaos of passion, having a chilly earth. There's coldness later with the stars and the night wind. The dream is compared later to a night wind that passes, or a chilly wind that comes over them. They speak of seeing an image of one's own spirit within the moon. So there's almost sort of like an astral projection going on of seeing oneself outside of the body. And the speaker reflects that dreams for them one time were, as a boy, were kind of a method of escape for them. And they're still a young person, but they wish that they could kind of slip off into this eternal dream. And that might sound euphemistic for something like suicide, but I think it's not that concrete within this poem. I think that it's something that is more of a heightened state of a spirituality that would rely more upon imagination and intuition, knowing that Poe was working in and reacting against the romantic tradition. And so that, I think, is the means of escaping the doldrums of life and the slings and arrows that life throws this person's way. And they also want to escape hope, right? They say at the end that to the delirious eye, there are more lovely things of paradise and love than hope has ever in their sunniest hour known. This person's skeptical of hope, I assume because hope has never delivered upon them, but that the delirious eye, the crazy eye, the one that sees and perceives things that are not there, things that are kind of phantoms for them, that gives them more concrete things that are permanent and yet eternal, like paradise and love, whereas hope is for them a sort of empty promise. And so I read this poem as someone who is wishing that they could live their entire life inside a dream because it spares them from the pains and the toils of everyday life, Um, and yet knowing that they cannot eternally be in that place of imagination and intuition, um, because those things too must pass like the wind, right? It says, "'Twas once and only once at the wild hour, for my remembrance shall not pass. Some power had a spell over me." Um, and so for them, going to sleep and dreaming becomes this kind of, an anesthetic, or this kind of heightened state that you have to come back from. Otherwise, it kind of loses its luster. You're no longer really escaping from something or being able to experience the happiness of that. So there's a sense of longing in this poem that is not really alleviated so much as it's balanced by the disappointment of reality and of having to remain within the waking state. Um, Again, not as scary of a poem as it is kind of an upsetting or depressing poem, but one that it kind of fearlessly looks at some of the darker aspects of the human psyche that Poe becomes known for. Um, that's all I'll say today about dreams. And thank you for joining us. I hope to see you again. And until then, have a peaceful day.